According to Teachers Pay Teachers, the vast majority of buyers state that the preview for a product is what sold them on the product. So how can you create previews that are going to sell buyers on your products? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Let's go ahead and get started. In last week's video, we talked about how to create a cover that would catch the eye of your buyer and have them click on through to learn more about your product. In today's video, we're going to be talking about what to include inside of your preview so that your buyer wants to purchase the product. So we're going to be covering the three biggest things that your preview needs to include or should have in order to sell a buyer on your product. So let's talk about number one. Have a central focus for each page of your preview. So the way that I like to do this is I like to break down or make a list of what is most important for my buyer to understand whenever they're purchasing my product. Do they need to understand how the resource works? Do they need to understand what all the resource includes? Do they need to understand what skills were covered? What do they need to know about my product in order to make an informed purchasing decision? And what do I feel like are the best features of my product, right? I want to make a whole list, and then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll cross some things off. And I'll go, you know what? This may be overkill. They don't necessarily need to know everything about the product. There's a statistic that's floating around out there that says buyers only need to know 30% about your product in order to make an informed purchasing decision. So while we obviously don't want to omit key information because we want the buyer to be able to get a clear picture of what our product is and what it will do for them, we also don't want to overload them. So we want to make sure that we have a central focus for each page of the preview. So for example, I have a set of activities inside of my store that are called DigiPacks. These are digital activity packs. Each activity pack contains 3 different digital activities for students that cover the same skill. Okay, so the first piece of information that I want my buyer to understand about my product is the fact that it has 3 different activities. So I have a page for my preview that shows each one of the different activities. And at the bottom in big bold text, it says 3 digital activities. And then in smaller text, right next to a picture of each one of those activities, it gives a small sentence that explains what the activity is so that the buyer can see this contains 3 different activities inside of this activity pack. Okay, that's the first piece of information that I want them to know. And then another point that I want them to know is I want them to know that they can grade at a glance, right? So they can take a look, they can quickly glance at the student's finished product and know whether or not they got it correct. And so I have a separate page for that. So I break it down into a central focus for each page. What this does is it allows me to, number one, focus on the most important selling points for my buyer. But number 2, and this is probably even more important, it allows the buyer to focus on one thing at a time. Because if I give them a page that is overloaded with all kinds of information, then they have to be able to try to piece together and process that information. Where the whole point of having a preview is to give them a visual understanding of your product. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure that they can quickly skim through the preview to get an idea of my product. And I don't necessarily want to put the entire product description on one page. So let's give you another example. Let's say I have a set of notes, right? What are some things that I might want my buyer to know about my notes? I might want them to know how many pages are included. So I would have a preview page that would include a sample of my pages or all of my pages shown, just depending on how many pages there are. And then down at the bottom, I would have big bold letters, X number of pages, right? 5 pages of student notes in practice. And then I may also want them to know that it includes digital and print versions. So on the next page of the preview, I would showcase the digital version of the notes, and I would say contains print and digital options. And then on the next page, I might want to talk about some different features that the notes have, just depending on what it is that I'm selling. But basically, we're breaking this down so that a buyer can digest the information about your product one little bit at a time. Okay, and we're not overloading them. The second thing that we want to do for our preview is to show our products in action. So this is pretty simple. If it's a printable resource, we can print it out. We can start coloring it in, filling it in, what have you. And then we take photos of the product as it's being used. So you can set this up fill in half the notes, show your hand filling in the notes, show your hand coloring if it's a coloring activity, show your hand sorting if it's a sorting activity, right? We want to be able to show pictures or images of the product in action. If it's a digital resource, we can show a mouse clicking over, right? Clicking on something, drag and dropping, and you can take a still image or a screenshot of the product as it's partially completed, right? So this is not showing the key. This is not showing the complete key. This is not showing the blank student page. What this is doing is it's showing what it looks like midway. And what showing your product in action does is it allows the buyer or the potential buyer to visualize using this product in their classroom. And if we can get the buyer to picture using this in their classroom, then we are one step closer to getting them to add that product to their cart. We want them to be able to picture using this with their students, okay? And so be really intentional when you're taking product photos or when you're staging your screenshots for your digital resources to make sure that you're showing those products as they're being used and not just the end results or the blank copy. Number 3, and this is really important. I see teachers forget this one all the time, and that is include a PDF preview. A lot of times we just throw the thumbnails up there and we're like, that's it, I'm done. But here's the deal. There are 2 big reasons why you want to make sure you have a PDF preview included on every single one of your resources. And the number 1 reason is it's hard to read those thumbnails. And depending on the resolution of their screen, the speed of their internet, and all kinds of different factors, sometimes thumbnails will show up blurry on one computer and it'll show up crystal clear on another. And so we want to make sure that the buyers can actually see what it is that you're selling and what's inside of your thumbnail. So even if you take the exact same thumbnails, you take those same thumbnails that you made and you just turn them into a PDF preview, that's fine. If you have good thumbnails, you're going to have a good PDF preview. So it's totally fine to do that, but go ahead and turn it into the PDF so that a buyer can click view preview, they can open that guy up and they can see it, they can zoom in, they can look however they want to, and they can be able to see your preview really clearly. The second reason that we want to do this is because it gives us some analytics and some data to look at later on, okay? So if I don't have a PDF preview there, then I'm missing the opportunity to look at some very specific data and to get some feedback from my data. Because let's say a buyer goes to my product, they take a look at my product, they look at the thumbnails, and then they go down and read the product description, but they decide not to add to their cart. I don't know, based on my data, was it my thumbnails that turned them off? Or was it my product description, or was it my price, right? I don't know where I lost them. But if I have a preview, then I have an extra piece of data to look at. Because chances are, if a buyer clicked through to my product, they scrolled through the thumbnails and then clicked my preview, it was not the cover, the thumbnails, or the price that bothered them. Chances are it was something in the preview or in the product description if they decided not to purchase, okay? And so that gives me some really good data to look at later on. So that's another key reason why it's really important to have that PDF preview so that it can kind of narrow down your focus if you're trying to troubleshoot why a product is not selling well for you. If on the other hand, the buyer comes in and they don't open that preview, they're not getting to the preview stage, then chances are it's your thumbnails that's turning them off, right? So we want to make sure that we have that preview in so that we have some really good data to get back. If you found this video helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I put out weekly videos along with my podcast, the Rebranded Teacher Podcast. You can find a link to the podcast down in the description. If you want to join my email list, you can grab a free copy of my year-long planner that's created specifically for TPT sellers. And you'll find a link to that down in the description. If you haven't joined the Rebranded Teacher Facebook group, now is a really good time because this week we're going to be doing a peer audit on previews and you do not want to miss that. You'll find the link to the free Facebook group for TPT sellers down in the show notes below. I will see you guys next week.